Okay, it's 7 o'clock. So when Melissa's on, we're going. Not sure what happened to her. But hi, everybody. It's Dr. Lisa with Grapevine Health. And I'm so excited for this conversation today. This very special show is being co hosted by Dr. Melissa Clarke, who you'll meet in just a second. But we are honored to have Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, who is a doctor who's been working in the lab very hard for all of us for several months now, almost a year now, right? Um, Working on the vaccine. And so many of you have sent in your questions about the coronavirus vaccines, lots of questions about what they aren't, what they're doing. And she is here to give us the real scoop, to tell us the real deal in plain speak. But before we turn to Dr. Corbett, I want to introduce Dr. Melissa Clarke. Dr. Clarke? I can't see Dr. Clarke. So Dr. Clarke will join us when she can. But Dr. Corbett, so thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate the commitment you have to the community to help people understand what's going on. As you know, this is all so complex and the information keeps changing. So people are getting confused about what's going on. So we're excited to have you here to help us clear up some misinformation.
Yes, I feel like I have embarked on probably what is like my fifth job now
Oh,
with community engagement. But it is, you're right, it is so important to get factual information out in very dissectable ways that the community can understand and really meet people at their doorstep really with the information. So I am happy to be here, and I'm very glad that you use your platform as well. And I
yeah.
do have one comment, because you said that I've been in the lab for the last year. And I think sometimes what goes unnoticed is that there is an entire team of scientists that I am just fortunate enough to lead, that are really doing the day-to-day lab work around these vaccines. And so I must mention them and say thank you to them as well.
Great, thank you. And actually, I connected to you through Dr. Barney Graham, who I've known for many years because of his work on HIV vaccines and other infectious diseases. So I really am grateful to him for the connection. But before we jump in, Dr. Melissa Clarke has joined us. Hi.
Hi, Dr. Lisa, and hi, Dr. Corbett. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight and be a co-host. I'm looking forward to this discussion because Dr. Corbett certainly has been a trailblazer and a leader when it's come to the vaccine, and to be able to talk with you directly and have the audience ask you questions directly, I'm sure will go a long way to addressing some of the misinformation that we have out here, frankly. And that's what Dr. Lisa and that's what I'm all about. So looking forward to this great discussion.
Great. So, Dr. Corbett, before we jump in with all these questions, we asked the community for questions, and they left so many questions for you. But first, why don't we just get to know you a little bit? Where are you from, and how did you end up becoming a scientist?
I'm from Hillsborough, North Carolina, which is about 15 minutes from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, in the Raleigh-Durham area. And so that's where I grew up. That's where I attended high school. And actually, that's how I became a scientist, is by working in a laboratory when I was in high school at the University of North Carolina, which is in Chapel Hill. And ever since then, I've really just loved the scientific process. I've loved asking questions about how nature works, and took several steps in my educational trajectory. And I ended up here working under Dr. Barney Graham at the Vaccine Research Center, which is in the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. That's directed by Dr. Tony Fauci.
And I'm sure so many young people will be very inspired by you and may look to see if they can also be like Dr. Corbett. So I'm always grateful to see other Black scientists who can show, because representation is so important. I say that all the time.
Absolutely.
And to be better than me, actually, better than Dr. Corbett, be better than
So one of the things we notice when we're talking to community, Melissa on her show, or me if I'm even on the street talking to people, is we tend to talk at a level that's higher than what people understand. So you can even see, a lot of the scientists and experts on television, they're using terms and people aren't really sure what they're talking about. So I would love to have you just start and explain to people what vaccines are, what are viruses doing in the body? Like, how do you make a vaccine? So just talk to us at a very basic level to make sure everybody's on the same page about viruses and vaccines.
Yeah, viruses are very, very small microorganisms. There's this entire debate out there of whether or not viruses are alive or whether or not they are not alive. And the reason why that debate is a thing is because one of the really cool things about viruses is that they need a host cell. So what that means is they need a body with cells in it, whether it be from a human or an animal, in order to replicate and in order to live and to thrive. And so there are these microorganisms that literally use our cells to replicate and to make more viruses. And the reason why they are so devastating in the case, for example, with this particular virus that's circulating right now, SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes COVID, is because they have worked in nature over hundreds of years to really get a sense of how to replicate efficiently and, more importantly, how to hide from our immune systems. So a lot of times you hear, oh, well, if you just build up your immune cells, you'll be fine. You can fight off a virus. And to some extent, that might be true. Sure, you want to be healthy and you want to have a healthy immune system, etc. But vaccines come into play because vaccines are a way to really arm and train your immune system specifically to fight away viruses. And so the way that you make a vaccine is basically by tricking the immune system to believe that it has seen the virus before, even if it hasn't seen the virus before. And that's the really unique method that we are using here with these currently available SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 vaccines. We're tricking the immune system to be alarmed to a particular protein on viruses. So viruses have multiple proteins, but a lot of times they have proteins on their surface, and that's what the immune system sees. And so we can just deliver that protein to your immune system to arm your immune system against that virus later. And that's how vaccines work.
And it just goes to show that the body is just such a miracle of a machine, isn't it? It does all these amazing things that we can't see or feel, but it's really it's great to hear from you how this is all working together.
Yeah, the body is absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing. And trust me, I wish that there was a way that I could say, we could just take vitamin C or what other natural cure, or so to speak, that people have said on the internet to really make our defense system so good that we could be able to fight off viruses. But the truth is that in all of our glory and with all of our body cells that are working day in and day out to prevent infection, sometimes that is just not enough. And that is what we're seeing here with SARS-CoV-2, and that we need a little extra something to arm ourselves against these viruses in a very specific way to keep ourselves from being sick.
But you know, and I'm sure you've seen this too, people are very distrustful of these coronavirus vaccines because we got them so fast. And people are saying, how is it that we have vaccines already for coronavirus when we've been trying to find a vaccine for HIV for years? So, can you help people understand how is it that we have a coronavirus? So, we have more than one coronavirus already. How did the process go so fast this time?
The process really went so fast this time for multiple reasons. One of the biggest reasons is because we were able to use research that we've been doing for several years, upwards of even 10 years prior to me getting to the Vaccine Research Center. And then certainly within the last 6 years since I've been at the Vaccine Research Center, where we've studied coronaviruses and their proteins, like the ones I was talking about before that we need to use for vaccine development, in so much intricate detail that we knew exactly how we might want to target those proteins in vaccine development. And so we used knowledge that we generated from previous coronavirus outbreaks, for example, with SARS, which was an outbreak that happened over a decade ago. And then around the time that I got to the Vaccine Research Center in 2014, there was a MERS outbreak, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, which is also a coronavirus that you all may have heard about. And so we started to really work very hard at understanding how to make a really good vaccine to it. So that took multiple steps and tons of experiments over the last decade, and particularly in the last 6 years. And then the other thing that's happening here is that although it is scary to hear that we are using a novel or new technology, to us on the scientific side, it is not so new because the mRNA technologies that are being utilized in these vaccine efforts, at least the initial vaccine efforts, have been studied for a couple of decades in academic laboratories across the world, many of which are there in the United States, for example, at the University of Pennsylvania, where the idea that you can really use messages or genetic codes to tell the body how to make a specific protein has really been a way to revolutionize not just vaccine development as we're seeing here, but cancer therapeutics and et cetera. And so the research around coronavirus vaccine development and also the ability to really monopolize on the research around messenger RNA delivery platforms really came into play here. And it goes without saying that the other thing that's happening here is that there is just a need, a dire need, just given the circumstances of which we are living. I mean, I think I checked the numbers yesterday. I think there's a person in the United States that's dying or two people that are dying every minute from COVID-19.
Wow. Yeah.
And so tons of resources, tons of collaborations across various agencies under the.
It's unprecedented.
It is actually unprecedented. The amount of collaboration, the amount of crosstalk around between the different agencies, and the amount of finances that have been put towards this effort for not just vaccine development, therapeutics, and otherwise as well, to really defeat this virus is unprecedented and has certainly sped up the process.
Yeah. So I just have a question before I turn it over to Dr. Clarke to ask a few questions. You mentioned messenger RNA. And as you probably know, messenger RNA is the source of a lot of misinformation.
Yep.
So what is messenger RNA? What is it doing in this vaccine? And people want to know, does it change your DNA? Why or why not?
No, messenger RNA does not change your DNA at all, actually. So these messages that are generated in the messenger RNA vaccine are just for one specific protein. It is called the spike protein, and it is the protein that is on the surface of a coronavirus. So in a very, very cool way, we are delivering just the message for the spike protein. And basically that message goes into your muscle cells, and the spike protein is being expressed by your muscle cells. And your body gets alerted to that spike protein and then starts to do all the things that need to do to learn how to see that spike protein. So it's looking at its shape, the form, and it is generating a really, really specific immune response against it. And that's how you get protection by way of antibodies, or which are other proteins that your body makes to protect you against viruses, against coronavirus. And the reason why the messenger RNA cannot change your DNA is because the messenger RNA does not go to your nucleus of your cells at all. It stays in what's called the cytoplasm. So this is like the squishy outside part of your cell, outside of the nucleus, where all of your genetic code is in lies, etc. And the parts of the cell in the cytoplasm is what reads the messenger RNA. And so it can't get into change your genetic code. We're not trying to make you superhuman in any way. We're really for a very short time just telling your cells to make a coronavirus spike protein so that your immune system can build up against it. And that time is so short, right? So the message inside of your cell only lasts for about 24 hours. So there's no integration into the DNA in 24 hours at all. And it just does not happen. And the spike protein even that is being expressed only lasts, is also transient, so is how we call it, but only lasts for up to a week. But really in 72 hours, much of that spike protein is no longer even in your body. And so this reaction that you get from the messenger RNA, from the vaccine, is very short-lived and does not integrate into your DNA at all.
But you said it can't integrate into your DNA, or it can't change your DNA, because it actually doesn't come in contact with your DNA, right? And DNA is what determines how you're different from me and I'm different from Melissa and so on, right?
Absolutely. Cannot come in contact with your DNA.
Okay. Dr. Clarke.
Yeah, so great discussion. You know, when you were talking about the messenger RNA, it reminded me of the TV series and the movie Mission Impossible, where they got the instructions and then this instruction self-destructed after a certain amount of time, which is exactly what you're talking about. So I call it messenger RNA. This message self-destructs after less than 24 hours. So the discussion has been really good, but there's still some, questions that people have around immunity. And, what is immunity, first of all? Because a lot of times that, again, is used in the news media and people don't really understand what that term is. So maybe we could start there, and then we could build on a lot of the questions that audience members actually left on Dr. Lisa's page and on my page for you. So let's start there.
So immunity is really something that is very specific. And that's why I think a lot of the general public gets really confused about immunity, so to speak. And that's why a lot of us sometimes think that we can just, if we have a strong body, that we can fight off viruses. But the way that immunity works is that it is very, very specific, in that what the body has built up, these antibodies that the body has built up, they target specifically to the coronavirus in such a way that no other thing, no matter what you do to the body, can do that. And immunity means prevention. It means that your body is built to be preventive against viral infection, and then in turn, viral disease like COVID-19. And so that is what immunity is.
Great. And then the corollary to that is another term that gets thrown around, herd immunity, because there was a talk about, we can get to herd immunity without a vaccine if everybody just gets the disease. So what is herd immunity, and what role does the vaccine play in it? And why is it better to get to herd immunity using a vaccine?
So, firstly, herd immunity is a concept that is birthed out of vaccinology. And so to have the idea come about around with the idea that we can just let a virus run rampant in our population and people might be immune to it later. And because of that, also with a 1% case fatality rate, people have to die.
What does that mean, the case fatality rate?
It means that for all of the cases of COVID, 1% of people pass away or succumb to their infection. And so if we allowed that to happen in order to achieve herd immunity across the globe, about 40 million people would have to succumb to COVID-19. And so to think about getting immunity on some population level, herd immunity, so to speak, but having to have people die along the way is just unacceptable. And so the reason why vaccines can get us to the point where we have about 70% of people who are immune to a virus and thus achieve some level of population immunity in a very safe way is because you can generate this very specific immunity with a vaccine without having to be infected. And the reason why that's better from a vaccine perspective as opposed to a natural infection perspective is also because we have no clue about how well the virus elicits quote unquote immunity, right? You heard about the cases of people who've gotten multiple infections of COVID. I actually have a friend who's been infected twice now since the pandemic began. And also, there is tons of data that is coming out of people who have recovered from their COVID infections where they don't even have really good antibody responses at all. And so you're really playing Russian roulette when you think about, I'll just get infected and then I'll be immune. Well, number one, the outcomes of being infected is that you could possibly become very seriously ill or die. And then secondly, that there's about a 1/3 chance that your immune system won't even build up for you to be protected the next time. And so that is really the types of gambles that you're playing with herd immunity generated by natural infection. Right. So the best way or the best path towards herd immunity is via vaccination. And really the point of herd immunity is just to say, if we are all four in a community, think about us in a community, and 2 of us are vaccinated, then 50%, there's a 50% chance that I can't carry the virus to you, etc. Right? And so you really start to put up roadblocks for viral transmission in a way. So you'll start to see a downturn in the dynamics of the pandemic being transmitted in the community and across the globe.
Because that virus needs a place to live.
Because the virus
needs to have some place to live, it's gonna die, right?
You know, what's stepping out of this, particularly as we see these mutations popping up, etc., is that's one of the things that I keep trying to remind people is that we're here because we're giving the virus a host. If we just stop the virus from spreading, then we can get back to our normal times. And aside from very strict lockdowns and things of that nature that we've been through before, a vaccine is really kind of the only way that we're going to be able to do that.
So thank you. So now that we've level set about immunity, how long does the immunity from the COVID-19, from the coronavirus vaccine last? Do we know?
The short answer is no, we do not know. But there's a million things that we do not know. But the overarching answer is that the reason why people are so worried about how long immunity lasts is because of how we've been taught to think about vaccinology, given the idea that we have to be vaccinated every year for seasonal flu. Right? And it's not the same. Coronaviruses are not the same. The reason why we have seasonal transmissions of flu that you have to protect yourself against every single year is because flu is a completely different virus. And the proteins on the surface of the flu virus, which is how the vaccine works, right? Mm-hmm. They reassort, so to speak. So they go off over the course of the year. And what comes back around into your community the next year are completely different strains of the influenza virus that your body is not protected against given the vaccine that you got the year before. So that's a little bit different. Here, what we're working with is, although you do see these trees that are branching out with multiple different quote unquote variants or strains of the virus, are largely the same viruses, right? And so if you can protect yourself against those and elicit enough level of immunity by way of antibodies, then the idea is that you would be protected for some time.
Right. Well, right.
And we've shown, sorry, I just had to.
That's okay. It's a lot to talk about.
I'm going to insert a little bit of data in there, although I really try to not do the data thing on community calls, because you know, sometimes it can just lead people astray. But, you know, we've shown from the phase 1 clinical trial, which for the Moderna candidate started on March 16th of last year. So, you know, we're about 2 months from the year mark of that. And we've shown that the immune responses generated by the vaccine are not waning. And so that is good to see, right? So you can't necessarily correlate that to quote unquote immunity or protection, but at least by way of looking at those immune responses in those first vaccinated people, we can see that those responses are not waning.
Right. Well, right before I pass it back over to Dr. Lisa, I think you mentioned the word strains, and, you know, we've heard about the Nigerian strain and the South African strain and the UK strain.
I just want to say that these strains, so to speak, which I don't even like that term, and I'm going to talk about why I don't, have kept me up. And I thought that when I would come into 2021, I've done my job. We have a vaccine. Let's get it into people's arms. Let's start to see this pandemic make a downturn. And then I've been on calls all week about strains. So I am like, okay, so here we are. 2021 is just presenting itself in the same way as it did last year. But there are strains
for us. Yeah.
There are strains. There are quote unquote different strains of this virus, and what that means is that if you look at the genetics of the virus, there are changes in the virus, right? But how these viruses distance themselves from their cousins, right? So we all have first cousins, second cousins, third cousins, first removed, second removed, you know, great aunties. Think about the family tree of coronaviruses like that. So I would consider the quote unquote strains that we are seeing pop up in the media to be like first cousins, right? Like close enough related. And I actually don't necessarily like the word strains, because when I think about strains, I think about immunity. I think about, if you're protected against this one, might you be protected against that one? And we haven't seen any indication that there might be any real significant fallout of immunity just yet. And so let's talk about them by saying variant. Genetic variant is how I like to say it.
And that's a term that we would use, but the public uses strain, and that was the question.
They do use strain, but I want people to wrap their head around it's not like influenza where, you know, one year you have, you know, H1N1 and the next year you have something completely different. It's not the same. And so while we do need to be diligent, because to be frank, the reason why these genetic variants are popping up is because we are allowing the virus to transmit and continue to transmit. But let's remain diligent, and let's try to remain you know, as calm as possible when we think about this genetic variation. And also remember that the virus literally has one job, right? The only job the virus has right now is to continue to transmit and to continue to build up genetic diversity, because that's exactly what the virus has been doing for however long years it's been out in nature. And so giving it an easy access to that job is just unfortunate. And so we should just try to be diligent about that.
Wow. Dr. Lisa?
Yeah, well, when I talk to people about this notion, there's a new strain, you know, we hear the word mutate a lot. And that is a scary word, especially if you're talking about a virus like coronavirus. So the way I talk about it to people is just explaining that viruses copy themselves. So if they keep copying themselves over and over, just as if you make a copy of a document, if you hold the copy up next to the original, you can always tell it's not perfect. And that's the same thing that's happening with these viruses. But the most important thing is that it's not making people sicker. It's not killing more people. So I think keeping that in perspective is also really helpful when talking about these variants and mutations and all this scary language.
Right. And keeping into perspective that these genomes, so to speak, so the entire RNA code for these viruses is so large, to expect that they're, as they copy themselves and as they make duplicates of themselves, to expect that there might not be any changes at all is just probably a little more on the
Realistic.
side. And so I, the truth is that the coronaviruses have proofreading mechanisms, thankfully, right? And so they're mutating far less than, so for example, like HIV would be, or influenza. So they're making copies, and sometimes they do make mistakes. And yes, the word mutation is a very scary term, but that's what happens when you allow viruses to circulate in the way that they do.
Yeah. So I want to talk about a couple more myths that are very common, and I'm sure you've heard them. One is about messenger RNA and its impact on fertility. I'm not sure where this myth is coming from, so maybe if you could enlighten us if you know, but can you answer that question for people? Does messenger RNA affect your fertility or a man's ability to produce sperm, a woman's ovaries or eggs, or ability to have a baby? So tell us about that.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And part of the reason is because of what we talked about before in regards to where the messenger RNA goes into your cell and how it does not come in contact with your DNA at all, and it's not being expressed by any of your reproductive system organs, etc. And so, no, messenger RNA does not affect your fertility. And while there have not been full-on placebo-controlled phase 3 trials in pregnant women just yet, there were women in the phase 3 trial for both Pfizer and Moderna that did get pregnant during their vaccination. And as far as we know, that they are doing just fine.
Yeah. What about
and I am a woman of childbearing age, and once y'all allow me to not have 5 jobs and stop the virus from transmitting and take your vaccines so I can get back to my normal life, I fully plan to have kids one day.
So you wouldn't take the vaccine if it would jeopardize your ability to have children?
Not.
Yes.
Absolutely not. I wouldn't take anything that I felt like would jeopardize my health, or the health of my offspring. So I get why people might be concerned, but you shouldn't be concerned because of just the way that the messenger RNA works in your body. And so,
yeah. And by the way, I saw the photo of you getting the coronavirus vaccine, and I thought, what a powerful image. Here is the woman, a Black woman no less, who was on the team that created this vaccine to help us in this pandemic, and you were getting the vaccine. I just thought that is just really, really beautiful.
I actually had a conversation with my boss about it because I think that there is some level of privilege attached to it, and I have to be frank about that, right? So there are communities that are probably not going to see the vaccine in their community until, early spring or something next year. And so to have early access to it, I went back and forth. And I actually was like, you know what if I instead use my power to join? Because I think it was maybe the week before Novavax's phase 3 had started. Novavax is another company that's coming into the fold with a separate candidate. It's like, what if I use my power and my messaging to just join their clinical trial instead, and not give off this air of privilege that I can just go get the vaccine. But I do think that it's important for people to see that I'm willing to get the vaccine. I wish I could show you guys my family text messages. I am hounding them every single day to make sure now my family is slowly being vaccinated in their health departments, etc. And so it's very powerful messaging, and I'm happy to have done it. And I would have taken the shot months ago, but yeah.
What do you say to people who still are very skeptical or hesitant to get the vaccine? And even seeing Black people, I think all 3 of us have I'm participating in the Moderna trial. I know, Melissa, you've been vaccinated, right? But people can still see us getting the vaccine, benefiting from the science, and still be skeptical. What's your message to them?
You know, the one thing that I'm trying to do is to not have a message for them at all unless they ask. Because I think that vaccine hesitancy comes from such individualized perspectives that it's good to get a very clear view on why someone might be vaccine hesitant. So, generally speaking, I say, you know, what is the concern that you have? And I get everything from the timeline of the development, or we haven't followed people long enough. And so my overarching reply is that if you are vaccine hesitant, try to, as soon as possible, really wrap your mind around what is it the thing that you want to see. Do you want to see 100,000, I don't know, 100 million people vaccinated in the US? Do you want to see 6-month follow up from the phase 3 clinical trial? Whatever it is that you want to see, wrap your head around that thing, and then find the source for which you will get reliable information about that data point, so to speak. And so part of being vaccine hesitant is really around being as adequately informed with the right information to help you make your decision. And so guiding people to those sources and having them walk themselves through the questions that they have, I find a lot of times really does help.
Mm-hmm.
And from the perspective of where I sit, having had help design help design the Moderna candidate, having patent pending technologies that is being used in 5 of the 6 candidates in the United States portfolio, et cetera. From that side of things, having seen the development of the Moderna vaccine all the way through to this point and continuing to assess different things with our team, I think that my perspective is that if you are worried about if there was any irresponsibility around the development of these vaccines, then hopefully I can leave you and you can be rest assured that there was not. If anything, with all of the eyes that were on this vaccine development process, the responsibility and the onus that lays on not just us as the developers, but also on the regulatory agencies to be transparent around it and to really provide the people with a safe and effective product has been much greater than I think many vaccinologists has even seen before.
So related to this, though, as someone who helped develop the Moderna vaccine, people want to know what is in it. So can you just put this to bed? Does it have fetal tissue and aborted fetal cells and all these other things people are saying is in it? What is in the vaccine?
No.
No what?
I just had to say no to the fetal tissue thing. Because that what that narrative comes from is that sometimes in the laboratory, cells, whatever their origin might be, are used to help us understand various things in the laboratory. But those types of cells were not used in the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine candidates at all. And even if those cells are used, those cells are not available in the actual vial of the vaccines. The cells are filtered out in very, very specific ways. I mean, the product that is generated to go into your arm is super pure product that comes with a standard that is beyond actually what purity that how we generally think about it. But so there aren't any fetal tissue in the vaccines. There is no formaldehyde or any of these other compounds that people like to say are in vaccines that might be dangerous for us. Actually, there are no preservatives in the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine candidates at all. So a lot of times these types of compounds are used to help to preserve the vaccine compound in the vial so that they last longer. But there are no preservatives in them, and so what you're getting in the vaccine vial are messenger RNAs and fats. So lipids, because the way that the messenger RNA is delivered into your cell is by wrapping it into what's called a lipid nanoparticle, or about a ball of fat, and then other things like sucrose, which is sugar. And so you're getting very, very natural compounds, so to speak, that in your vaccine.
But how do you make a messenger RNA?
You put the genetic code into a computer, and then you have it spit it out into a vial.
So it comes out like a liquid? So
it is.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the messages actually encompassed inside of a liquid. Yes.
Wow. So that sounds very sci-fi. I think that's part of the reason people have trouble wrapping their head around understanding really what it is, because we always want to be able to touch, feel, or really connect with things. And so it's still kind of nebulous for people, but
well, I mean, so anything that whether it be protein or et cetera is encompassed in a genetic, like the genetic code is the starting point of that. And so just think about it as you're getting a line of sequence that's wrapped inside of a fat molecule.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just have one more question in this myth category. And I think it's a very creative way of thinking about what the body does. And it has to do with autoimmune diseases. So, diseases like lupus or fibromyalgia, sarcoidosis, if, folks who are listening wondering what those are. And with autoimmune diseases, your body can't recognize its own cells, and it turns against it and starts to attack, right? Mm-hmm. So the question is, if the messenger RNA is giving the body instructions to recognize this protein once it gets in the body, that becomes part of you. So
no, it doesn't.
What's preventing it? Well, this is the way the person is conceiving what's happening. Mm-hmm. So they see that as becoming a part of you. The messenger RNA is saying, okay, Lisa, I need your body to make this thing to fight off coronavirus, which is now a part of me. Why isn't it attacking my cells?
Because it's just the way the immune system works. And it's so beautiful in that it really goes, number one, it doesn't integrate into your cells permanently. And so this spike protein is being expressed for up to a week, but most likely more like 72 hours. And also the immune cells that go and pick up the spike protein, they go and pick it up and they deliver it to the part of the body where it goes to make these antibodies. And so it's not going to chew apart your immune system or chew apart your muscle in a way that you might expect in the same way that, for example, autoimmune diseases happen, because the reaction is so short and so transient.
Yeah. I heard someone else describe messenger RNA as like a Snapchat message. What do you think about that?
I think that is a great description.
Yeah.
It is like a Snapchat message, and it goes away, and your body doesn't even remember that it had the message there to begin.
Right.
Yeah. So this is and this is not something that is it's fancy when you think about utilizing it for vaccine delivery or for therapeutic delivery. But this happens in your cells on a day in and day out basis, right? Messenger RNA by default just gets degraded and tossed away by your cells.
One of the things that I mentioned when I talk about it, when I've talked about it before, when people are concerned about messenger RNA getting in your body, I say, anytime you get an infection with a virus of the common cold, the virus's mRNA is in your body, telling your body to make more copies of that virus. So it's nothing that your body has never experienced before. The only difference is that it's a very small part of the virus, of the total virus, not the entire virus RNA, so that the entire virus will be made. Only a very small part of it will be made. And I have to thank you, Dr. Lisa asked me if I got the vaccine. And yes, I did get the vaccine exactly a week ago. And specifically the Moderna vaccine. So I really need to thank you formally for giving me the opportunity to be vaccinated. And interestingly enough, when I was being observed in that observation period after, there was a pregnant woman, her due date is in February, and she had opted to take the vaccine after talking with her OBGYN because the reasoning was if she got COVID, it would be much more damaging and potentially deadly to her and her baby than getting the vaccine. And so it was better, they thought, for her to get the vaccine. And so I just wanted to share that with you before I talk about safety, because you mentioned that, and I thought you had a wonderful explanation around, why you don't, tell people, just address everything around vaccine hesitancy. You talk about specific things. So when it comes to safety, one of the questions that a lot of people have had is, this issue of what's in the vaccine and how do I know what's in the vaccine in case I get one of those severe allergic reactions. So maybe you could talk first about where people can look up exactly what's in the vaccine, because I know there's a website for that.
Mm-hmm.
And also, what is the risk of this severe allergic reaction?
You can also look up on my Instagram highlights, because I put what exactly is in the vaccine in my Instagram highlights on purpose. So you can look there, and then you can Google it, and think Moderna has it on their website. And it's also in the FDA package, that the briefing package from the emergency use authorization deliberation. So the exact ingredients for the vaccine are there. So, and when thinking about these allergic reactions, one of the key points that I want to remember all inclusively across this vaccine development is that this is the first time that the public is seeing vaccine development happen in their eyes in this way. Every single day, something's on the news about vaccine development, and it's really kind of all eyes on. And so, an allergic reaction to a vaccine is something that is going to be highlighted, right? However, the incidence of allergic reactions after taking this vaccine are not any different than what we've seen before. Actually, even a little bit less, but obviously less people have been vaccinated, so we don't really have a totality of that. And also, the people who are having any allergic reactions have had allergic reactions before, and oftentimes have had severe allergic reactions before, and oftentimes have allergies that they can't necessarily pinpoint. So there are people who know that they, are allergic to grass or something, right? But these people are oftentimes people who have had, broken out in hives or something like that, or had anaphylaxis before, and they couldn't necessarily pinpoint from where it came. And so I also want to say that the FDA is monitoring allergic reactions very clearly. There has been a onset of so many studies for people who are studying these allergic reactions in animal models and otherwise. And they are not any more of a cause for concern than any other vaccine, and particularly not for your normal everyday person who might have, an allergy to something that in their allergic reaction not necessarily have ever been that serious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And just the rarity of these allergic reactions, again, compared to what happens to you when you get COVID, I always say it pales in comparison. The other safety issue that people have a lot of questions about is the health of your nerves. So Bell's palsy, which is an inflammation of the nerve, or transverse myelitis, which is a fancy term for inflammation of the spinal cord, which happens after viral infections usually. But we do know that there was an incidence in the AstraZeneca study where the study was stopped because someone got transverse myelitis. Can you speak to that? And what is the actual danger? Is there a danger at all from the vaccines causing either of these issues?
Yeah, so I can speak to that. So, one of the things that I like to remind people around the stopping of the AstraZeneca clinical trials when that incident happened is that is very much a good sign that the system works, right? So the idea behind stopping that clinical trial when that incident happens was to determine whether or not that incident could be related to the vaccine or not. And it was determined that it was not. And you are right. These types of reactions do happen following viral infections. In fact, if you look at, for example, the Moderna phase 3 data package online, for example, with Bell's palsy, I believe that there were 4 total cases, and there was only, oh man, I'm forgetting my numbers. I don't remember, but
not a lot.
Yeah, there were like 4 total cases, and there were cases in the placebo, so much so that they could determine that it was not something that was happening by the vaccine, but instead by chance. And that chance was in line with your everyday chance of getting Bell's palsy as you walk about this earth. And so that is the one thing that is really, really fundamental to remember, is that with these quote unquote adverse reactions, that they have to be significant enough and associated, and specifically associated with the vaccine, in order for one to say, okay, the vaccine caused X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And that is not what is happening with these Bell's palsy cases and otherwise. Also, that Bell's palsy is treatable, and also very transient. So it's not some lifelong reaction. And those are the main takeaway points from that.
And I think that's really important, the understanding that there is sort of a background level at which these things happen anyway. And what was observed in the study was the same rate at which these background level of things happen anyway.
And so, moreover, it was observed in people who didn't even get the vaccine in the study, which furthermore says you can't associate it with the vaccine at all.
Right. And then I think the other pressing question, around safety is, the time period, as you mentioned before, that observation period of 2 months before the emergency use authorization was applied for. Is that long enough? Are there problems with vaccines that we see beyond that 2-month period where, a longer observation period is warranted? Could you speak to that choosing of the 2 months and how it relates to vaccine safety overall?
Right. So choosing of the 2 months from the regulatory standpoint, from the FDA standpoint, was actually strategic and database. And the reason is because that adverse reactions from vaccine, as have been seen before, 95% of those happen within the first 2 months following the vaccination. So the FDA made a very strategic and data-driven choice to say, in order for the companies to even apply for emergency use authorization, they must follow a median, so about half of the participants in their clinical trial, for 2 months following their second vaccination. So that's where that came from. And the answer to the short question was that, is that long enough? And yes, it is long enough for an emergency use authorization. The other thing that is important to remember is that the participants of these clinical trials, actually the phase 1 clinical trial is actually still going on. People are still being monitored. And the phase 3 particularly, they're still being monitored for adverse events. And their adverse events are still being documented, if they shall be. And even as far back as the phase 1 that started in March, we're not seeing any long-term adverse events at all. Actually, what is being seen is right in line with data that we have seen before, in that, generally speaking, the adverse events are going to happen almost immediately following your second dose, and immediately following your doses of your vaccine. And so that is really important to note, and that it is also important to note that in order for these companies to submit for licensure for general use back to the FDA, they actually have to go back to the FDA and present even more data around safety and efficacy from these vaccine candidates to get a licensure for general use. And so there's continuing monitoring, and 2 months is absolutely enough.
Right. Adverse events meaning problems or complications. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah. So I actually Yeah. So if you look at what adverse event means, I agree there probably should be a different term, because that could be anything from like a sore arm
Mm-hmm.
to a fever or sore muscles, etc. So every single thing that you can think of under the sun is documented following people who get vaccinated.
Right. Absolutely. So I'm going to hand it back over to Dr. Lisa, but thank you. Those were really shed light on a lot of worries that people have about safety.
So we're coming to the top of the hour, and again, we really appreciate you spending time with us. I just have one more question. The list of questions could be endless, so we can't cover everything. But a lot of people are confused about why you still have to wear a mask even though you get a vaccine. And it's interesting to me that we have created, well, I'm not sure we created the expectation, but somewhere there's an expectation that because you get a vaccine, which is to prevent you from getting sick, that also will prevent you from transmitting. And I see these as two separate issues. They could potentially be related, but I think the public feels there's a strong connection. So why do we still have to wear a mask, even though people may be getting vaccinated?
We still have to wear masks even though people are getting vaccinated, because we don't know enough about how these vaccines might prevent us from transmitting virus onward to other people. And until we have those data, it's important to remain diligent around that. So you're right. The efficacy that you hear about and you see about from these emergency use authorizations, the 94, 95% efficacy is around prevention of COVID disease. So that is symptomatic COVID disease. There have been no studies that have determined whether or not one might be able to be prevention of just blanket infection, or whether or not one virus might get into one of your cells, and whether or not you might be able to transmit that virus onward. Are there indications that transmission, et cetera, might be dampened in a vaccinated person? Sure. In animal models, we studied that. We published that in New England Journal of Medicine, et cetera. But until we have the data, it is very important to remain diligent, especially until there is this quote unquote herd immunity, where there are so many people vaccinated in the population that transmission becomes really a non-factor or less of an issue.
But if you think about how coronavirus is transmitted, so let's say you and I are in close proximity and I sneeze or I cough, you could inhale that even though you're a vaccinated person. And then you could potentially, it's still in your airway, you could potentially still transfer that to someone else if you don't have on a mask. So this is why I'm a little concerned that people are automatically thinking that the vaccine actually prevents you or me from giving it to you in a scenario like that.
Yeah, you can still inhale that, and it takes. I mean, it's there. Even if the reaction does go up to fight the virus away in your upper airway and etc., it does take some time, right? It's not this immediate thing. It's quicker than if you were not vaccinated, but it's not so immediate that there is zero risk of you transmitting that initial inoculum of virus onto someone else.
Yeah. All right. Well, Dr. Corbett, any last words? Anything you want to tell folks that we didn't ask you about, or things you think are important for us to know?
I like to really just close this out with thanking people for showing up to these kinds of things, because I think that one of the most important things to do in times like this, when you do have questions about vaccines and vaccine development and et cetera, is to remain informed. So you tuning in tonight is probably as much diligence as I would really hope for everyone. And to continue to ask questions if you are vaccine hesitant, and continue to follow data very closely. And also, times are strange right now, right? We're all a little bit worn from having just spent about a year in our homes and masked up. But change is on the way, and there is light at the end of the tunnel if we all just remain diligent and steadfast in the things that we need to do and socially responsible.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Corbett, and also Dr. Melissa Clarke, really great co-host. Thank you all so much. And for those of you watching and those who are going to watch this later, we have the power to prevent the spread of coronavirus. Wash your hands, wear your mask, keep the distance. So
please, please, for my sanity.
Yes.
Yes. All right. Well, have a good night, and thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thanks for being here.